everyone to Right Way Up, presented by the Gloucester Writer Center. My name is Megan, and I'm located here in the Maud Olson Library in Gloucester, Massachusetts. Today, we'll be talking to novelist Emily Temple about her career in writing. So before we begin, Emily is the managing editor at the literary website and news source Literary Hub, and also published her first novel last year in 2020 called The Lightness. Her fiction has appeared previously in many places, such as Colorado Review, Indiana Review, Fairy Tale Review, Territory, and many more. So without further ado, welcome Emily Temple.
Thanks for having me.
No problem. So if you don't mind, where are you located right now?
I'm in Brooklyn, in my apartment where I have been for the last year without leaving, really.
Yeah, it's that COVID life.
Yep.
So let's get right into it. So I personally heard about you from The Lightness. I read your novel about a month back, and I really enjoyed it. It had this very distinct vibe to it, and when I was looking into it, some people had compared it to Donna Tartt's The Secret History, which I thought was pretty accurate. But also what really stood out to me was the focus on the girls in the story and how kind of honest they were as girls in general. And how almost magical it was. Reading more of your writing, I've noticed that you have this pull towards writing about girlhood and the ups and downs of it. So could you tell me how you found this niche in your writing and why you kind of stick to it?
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of reasons. I mean, the main reason is probably I'm just interested in teenage girls. I think that having been one myself long ago, it's this very particular and special time in your life where everything seems more magical and everything seems more possible. And your emotions are just stronger at that age. And that just makes for really interesting subject matter because everything is life or death. Everything is possibility in this way that, then you grow up and you get jaded and you think like, how could I ever thought that I would have levitated? And, but you have much more space as a teenager. You have much more imagination that's just like seems available, or at least that's how I felt then. And just the intensity of that time, I think is really interesting and fruitful. And plus, it's a little bit of wish fulfillment. Everyone loves to think about that time in their life when, everything was up in the air and you got to have these experiences for the first time. And, or at least I say everyone, I like to think about that now.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think it's such an interesting concept, and a lot of your writing shows that it has such provocative feelings to it. So I definitely see that. And this passion for girlhood has spawned quite a few different types of characters. You have mean girls and more nerdy girls, girls that are vulnerable and have bad families and stuff like that. So I was wondering if you've ever based characters on real people or even put yourself into them sometimes.
Oh yeah, every single one is me. I mean, it's funny. I did a Zoom with my high school friends after I published this book, and they were like, okay, Emily, like, we were your friends at this time. Tell us who is who. And I was like, I'm really sorry, guys. They're all me. Every 16-year-old girl in this book is me. Because, I have been the like weird, nerdy observer, outsider girl, and I have been the scary ringleader, and I have been the like blonde, like, sex object. Like I have been all of these girls, and I feel like most teenage girls are all those girls. Like the idea that our culture is always trying to put us all into these like little categories that we're supposed to stay in for life, it just doesn't make any sense to me. I think we get more credit than that. And so I try to not only do I put little bits of myself into every character, but I also try to let them not be just one thing. Because no one is.
That's the magic of girlhood. You could be all of them.
Exactly.
So, besides the subject matter of your writing, another thing that stands out is the language that you use. You seem to say so much without physically using so many words. And so I was curious how over time you've refined your language because you've been writing for so long.
Language is really where it begins for me. I started most things that I write, actually, now that I think about it, come from a seed of a sentence as opposed to, oh, I have a great idea for a plot, which is, neither here nor there. It's just how it happens to me. And I grew up by loving Nabokov and like these really elaborate prose stylists. But I just like to play around with the prose and be surprised and surprise myself. I quote this all the time, but there's this Robert Frost essay where he says, he's talking about poetry, and he says, no joy for the writer, no joy for the reader, no surprise for the writer, no surprise for the reader. And so when I'm working on the sentence level, I'm always trying to bring myself joy and to surprise myself if possible, and then just hope that that translates. And, which is really, if it does, is the absolute best I can do.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Um, so let's backtrack a bit. This is something that is super interesting to the Gloucester Writer Center specifically. So I read when you were growing up, you were pretty much surrounded by books, and specifically, it mentioned that your father had studied with Allen Ginsberg. Here at the Gloucester Writer Center, the Beats are like a huge deal because Charles Olson, the poet, was, a big part of Gloucester. And so, I was wondering if you ever had like a similar connection to beat poetry, or if you were ever inspired by it or by your parents' love of literature.
Well, I mean, the easy answer to that is that, of course, I was inspired by my parents' love of literature. I grew up in a house full of books. When I was a kid, the only thing that I definitely was allowed to get, was 2 books when we went to Barnes and Noble in Syracuse. I was not, my parents are both ex-hippies, and I was not showered with every new plastic toy, but I was allowed to get whatever 2 books I wanted whenever we went to the bookstore. And so and my dad read to me every night before I went to sleep when I was a kid. And it was really just a big part of my life from the time I was born. My parents are big readers too. And so, yeah, I mean, books were always a part of my life. And my dad, before I was born, became involved in Buddhism, and he was a student of the same teacher that Allen Ginsberg was a student of, Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche. And so my dad did go to the Jack Kerouac School of Disembodied Poetics and studied with Ginsberg. And I have asked him many times to show me some of the poems that he wrote in that class, and he claims not to have them, but I don't know. I think I have to do some more digging in the childhood home.
Yeah, for sure.
But so, I always really liked, so in fact, I have thought a lot about the Beats. I wrote my undergraduate thesis on the secular fiction of American Buddhist writers. And so I studied the Beats whose writing can only sometimes be called secular, but I studied them in conjunction with that project. And, I have mixed feelings about them at this point in my life, but I really, I think that there's a lot there, and that they are really interesting and lasting creators from this particular moment. And the fact that they have lasted for so long, and that people still really relate to their work, even now when the world is so different, shows that there was some kernel of, I mean, I hesitate to say like truth, but it feels like some kind of internal truth into what they were doing. Um, you know, Kerouac is sort of a sexist,
Yeah.
and Ginsburg was a member of NAMBLA. You know, I mean, they're sort of problematic.
Yeah, yeah, we can acknowledge the problematic parts of it.
Yeah.
Definitely. I see where you're coming from for sure.
Yeah, but that doesn't mean that they didn't create some beautiful stuff.
Yeah.
It
And I
just,
think this was such an interesting little tidbit that I found. I thought that was so fun.
yeah.
And also, the connection now that I'm seeing between the Buddhism of the beats to your novel, The Lightness, a lot of Buddhism in that, which I found super interesting. I feel like you don't get to see a lot of books these days about young people and religion as much, at least not with Buddhism in my experience. So I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah, I mean, it's the American experience of Buddhism and the beats are inextricably connected. The reason, I mean, because, yeah, so the Shambhala, which is the biggest, I think basically Shambhala is a sect of Buddhism that was invented for Westerners, and it was brought over by this teacher, Chogyam Trungpa, and he translated Tibetan Buddhism into this specific version for Westerners, and then it was sort of disseminated by the beats because they were his, or Allen Ginsberg particularly, but all of them to some extent, or I won't say all of them, but many of them to some extent were his students. And so it is like this very specific filter. And because my family practiced Shambhala, it's almost like or the way I think about it is the legacy of my family's religion is connected to this literature and this like world of literature. So for me, it was pretty natural that I would refuse them in my own novel.
Yeah, absolutely. So great. So interesting. So let's get into more of your nonfiction work. So, you've spoken before about how writing online has helped you a lot with your fiction writing in terms of speed and reaching deadlines and stuff like that. So, I was wondering how you got into writing online at places like Literary Hub and Flavorwire.
Yeah. I got an internship out of college at Flavorwire, and I was just writing little blog posts for, I mean, I was an English major and I had done a lot of writing in college, and I started a music magazine in college. I edited the literary magazine. I just, any opportunity to write about anything that I thought was interesting, I was always trying to take it in school. And so, yeah, so when I got out, when I graduated, I was looking for writing jobs. And I just took this little internship, and I figured out how to write these blog posts, culture blog posts. I think the first time, or the first, so this must have been 2009. I was writing, yeah. So I just started writing, and I eventually, I mean, this wasn't a full-time job. I eventually got a full-time job, and I had to leave, and then I came back. They wanted to hire me back. So it was really just, I got lucky with an internship, and then it was time on task. I just did it and did it and did it and did it and got better.
Yeah.
That's the only way you can do anything.
Yeah.
Task.
And I'm kind of curious. So I myself have done some online writing as an internship too, and then also I try to do some creative writing, and I feel like there's a lot of differences for me in like writing stuff for a website versus writing stuff for yourself. Do you notice any differences in maybe how you work, or you know, how quickly you come up with ideas or things like that?
Yeah, It's an interesting question because, of course, in a way, it's the same thing. You're putting yourself out there and you're putting your thoughts down, and both of them come from you in the most essential and, like, practical way. But they're actually such different beasts. When you're working on your creative work, or at least I will say, when I'm doing my own creative work, I am much more anxious about it. I overthink it. I'm fixating, as I've mentioned, on every sentence. I'm trying to look at it from a million different angles, and I want it to be good the first time I put it down on paper, which of course it never is. It's never good the first time you put it down. Everyone, editing is great. But with writing for a website, because it's more, well, first of all, it's nonfiction. So it's much more, and what I write is, I would describe it as criticism. It's still the same. It's still my thoughts, my view, my lens of things. But because it's not, we talk about like someone's novel or their like creative work as being like, this is their soul on display. But you don't say that about like their cultural criticism necessarily. Yeah. And so it's like the pressure is off in a certain way, even though probably more people will see my writing for Literary Hub, which gets millions of page views per month, than they will read my novel. There's something that I find freeing about it, because the internet is this sort of ephemeral space where things pop up, and then even though they never disappear, they sort of disappear. And it's given me the ability to let go a little bit on my creative side, to just think about, what, you get up and you got to write this stuff, you got to produce the content so that people will click, and you want it to be good and you want it to be interesting, but then you just let it go. And that letting it go part, that's what I have found is most useful to bring back to the creative writing, because you can always come back to it. But if you're fixated on the paragraph for one paragraph for 3 months, you will never finish that novel.
Yeah. And then there won't be any reflection on you at all. It just won't happen. Right. Yeah, I see that. So something interesting you once wrote was that for a long time you didn't consider yourself a writer because it seemed like a sort of special career for special people. And I think this is like a super interesting idea that I related to, and I feel like a lot of other young writers could relate to. So now that you've grown as a writer, do you have any advice on how to combat this idea of, not feeling like a writer, maybe because like you haven't accomplished a lot or for whatever reason?
I'm of two minds, because I want to just say, look, if you write, you're a writer. That's what the word means. Yeah. So you don't have to hold yourself to that extraordinary standard. On the other hand, I think in some ways it served me to venerate the idea of the writer to a certain extent, because it made me invest in it, and it made me read, and it made me, think about not what it was going to be like to like have my scarf and sit in a cafe and be writing the next great American novel. Like, that part is not helpful, but the part about how can I be looking around, and how can I be listening, and how can I be translating my environment to what I see, like a real writer. I think that learning those skills early on to try to emulate the writers that I wanted to be like, I think that was useful. But that was just useful for me. I would say everybody should just go out there and declare themselves a writer. My best friend from college showed up on day one and said to me, "I'm a poet. What are you?" And now she's so far ahead of me. She has 2 books of poetry. She has 5 YA novels, and she has her dream job teaching at Interlochen Arts Academy. And she's like amazing, because she just decided early on, I'm a writer, and it served her well. So I think that's actually the way.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like it.
Yeah, if I could go back, I would do what she did and just decide, and then no one's gonna tell you you're not.
Yeah, I mean, they'd probably be kind of mean if they did. It's a believe it till you achieve it kind of moment,
Exactly.
I guess.
But I mean, you are achieving it if you're someone who writes down things that you notice in a journal and, you know, thinks about how to string them together into a way that might move someone. You're just a writer. It doesn't matter if you've published that because you're not called a publisher.
Yeah,
You're
that's
just
very
a
true.
writer.
Yeah, for sure. So as our time comes to an end, I want to ask, the stereotypical question that an established writer gets, because like any aspiring writer, I want to know the secret to your success. So, what kind of advice do you have for those who want to become writers?
I think my best advice is, and I've sort of alluded to this before, but approach it with joy. If you are, everyone talks about how hard writing is and writing is terrible. And you can see this on Twitter all the time. Everyone is always complaining about writing. And that's fine. But everyone loves to complain about their job. But if what you're doing feels like pulling teeth, it may not be the right kind of writing. Like I suggest, because this is just what worked for me, is to find that topic, that mode, that space that feels like it was made for you. And because it becomes easy. It's not that it's not work, but it gives you joy. You can, that feeling when you are doing something and you look up and it's been 2 hours and you don't notice. That's where you should be finding your writing personality. Because if you can find that, that's going to be, it's like doing what you're naturally best at. And it might not be what your favorite writer does, but that's about finding your own voice. And that's going to make your writing great and special. And it's going to be sustainable, because if you are pulling teeth and you look up and it's been 37 seconds, it's going to take you a lot longer.
Yeah, for sure.
So I would say just like find your niche of where it feels good to you, and it feels like, when it feels like magic.
Absolutely. I love that. So before we close, I wanted to know, do you have any big plans for the future?
Well, I hope to continue being alive for some time.
Agreed.
Knock on wood. I'm working on another book, but I'm actually working on two other books, but I keep cheating on one of them with the other one, and then I go back, and so maybe neither one of them will ever get finished. um, but hopefully that will be coming up in not too long. Maybe the world will be better by then.
Hopefully. That is the hope.
Yeah.
Well, that's great to hear, and I also hope that it works out because I look forward to reading more. Thank you so much for talking to me.
Of course. Thanks for having me.
No problem. Have a great day.
Thank you. You too.
Bye bye.